Look at a Boeing 747 and your eye is drawn immediately to that strange, pregnant bulge rising from the fuselage like a question mark made of aluminum. For over half a century, that hump has defined the most iconic aircraft ever built. But here's what almost nobody knows. Boeing designed the 747's hump because they were absolutely certain the aircraft was going to fail. That distinctive forehead, the very feature that made the jumbo jet instantly recognizable, exists only because Boeing's engineers were planning for the plane's obsolescence before they'd even finished building the first one. This is the story of how preparing for failure created one of aviation's most enduring successes. In 1966, when Boeing committed to building the 747, the future of commercial aviation seemed crystal clear to everyone who mattered. Pan Am's visionary but demanding President Juan Trippe wanted a giant aircraft to lower his seat-mile costs across the Atlantic and Pacific. Boeing needed to beat Lockheed and Douglas to the wide-body market. But while they were all racing to build bigger passenger planes, another revolution was screaming overhead at 60,000 feet. Supersonic transports weren't science fiction anymore. The Concorde was already under development. The Soviet Tu-144 would fly in 2 years, and Boeing itself had just won a NASA contract to design an American supersonic transport, a Mach 2.7 monster that would carry 300 passengers at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. The logic seemed irrefutable. Who would choose to cross the Atlantic in 7 hours when they could do it in 3? Boeing's own market research suggested that by 1980, maybe earlier, supersonic jets would dominate long-haul routes. The 747 might have a decade of relevance, perhaps 15 years if they were lucky, before it became hopelessly obsolete. Pan Am would buy SSTs, so would TWA, BOAC, Air France, and every other premium carrier. The subsonic jumbo jet, Boeing's engineers believed, was already a dinosaur. They just had to build it anyway because airlines needed something to bridge the gap until supersonic flight became routine. This created an extraordinary design problem. You don't invest hundreds of millions of dollars in tooling and development for a plane you think will be outdated before you've paid off the loans. Joe Sutter, the legendary engineer who led the 747 program, and his team had to build an aircraft that could transform into something else when the supersonic age arrived. The question wasn't whether the 747 would become obsolete. The question was what to do with hundreds of massive airframes when nobody wanted to fly passengers in them anymore. The answer was freight. The 747 had to be the world's best passenger plane for a decade, and then convert into the world's best cargo plane for decades after that. This single assumption drove the most important design decision Boeing ever made. Cargo aircraft load from the nose. This isn't a preference or a suggestion. It's an engineering imperative. A front-loading freighter eliminates the structural complexities of building enormous side cargo doors that would require massive reinforcement. You can roll containers and pallets straight through the nose on a level deck, maximizing cubic capacity and minimizing loading time. Every purpose-built cargo jet from the C-5 Galaxy to modern freighters follows this logic. If the 747 was going to have a second life hauling freight, it needed a nose that could swing open. But the 747 also had to carry 400 passengers, and passengers don't appreciate sitting behind the cockpit in the nose cone. So Boeing made a decision that seemed bizarre to outside observers. They moved the cockpit upstairs. They created a second level, a raised flight deck that sat above the main passenger cabin. This left the entire nose section free and unobstructed. When the supersonic age arrived and airlines stopped buying 747s for passengers, Boeing could simply design a hinged nose section, and the aircraft would transform into the perfect freighter without any structural compromises. The hump wasn't an aesthetic choice or a way to add premium seating. It was an escape hatch. It was Boeing admitting they didn't believe in their own product's long-term future and engineering a backup plan into the aircraft's DNA. Of course, they couldn't make the hump just big enough for 2 pilots and a flight engineer. Aircraft economics are brutal, and every cubic foot of pressurized space costs money to build and certify. If Boeing was going to raise the cockpit and create a second level anyway, they might as well extend it backward and create usable space. The result was roughly 250 square feet of upper deck behind the cockpit. On early 747s, airlines used this space for crew rest areas or first-class lounges. Later, as passenger demand proved far more durable than Boeing predicted, airlines installed seats. The stretched 747-400 extended the hump further back, carrying passengers in the upper deck all the way to the wing box. But that hump, that graceful rise from the main fuselage, only exists because Boeing was planning for the 747's failure. Then something remarkable happened. The supersonic future never arrived. The American SST program collapsed in 1971 under environmental protests and cost overruns. Concorde entered service in 1976, but only 14 production aircraft were ever built. The economics were catastrophic. Concorde burned fuel at such an astonishing rate that only a handful of premium routes could justify the operating costs. The noise was politically toxic. The sonic boom meant supersonic flight over land was banned, crippling route networks. Airlines that had placed orders quietly backed away. The Tu-144 flew passengers for exactly 7 months before being withdrawn. Meanwhile, the 747 became the most successful wide-body aircraft in history. The hump that Boeing created as an exit strategy became its signature. That raised cockpit and distinctive forehead made the 747 instantly recognizable from miles away. The upper deck became synonymous with luxury and exclusivity. Airlines advertised their 747 upper deck service as a premium experience. Passengers requested it specifically. What Boeing designed as a compromise became the aircraft's greatest marketing asset. And the nose-loading cargo capability? Boeing did exactly what they planned. They developed the 747 freighter with a hinged nose, and it became the backbone of global air freight. FedEx, UPS, Cargolux, and Atlas Air built empires on 747 freighters. The design that was supposed to be a fallback plan when passenger demand evaporated became a parallel success story. Boeing sold the 747 as both a passenger plane and a freighter simultaneously for 50 years, and the raised cockpit worked perfectly for both missions. The deeper lesson cuts to the heart of engineering philosophy. The best designs aren't always the ones optimized for a single purpose. Sometimes preparing for failure, building in adaptability, and refusing to bet everything on a single future creates something more enduring than pure optimization ever could. Boeing's lack of confidence in the 747's passenger future forced them to create an aircraft flexible enough to serve 2 completely different missions. That flexibility, that refusal to commit entirely to one vision of the future, is precisely what allowed the 747 to dominate for half a century, while Concorde became a museum piece. The 747 hump exists because Boeing didn't believe. And because they didn't believe, they built something that outlasted every assumption, every competitor, and every prediction about the future of flight. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is plan for the possibility that you're wrong.